Spring had settled firmly across the plains, bringing with it the gentle warmth of longer days, the soft scent of new grass, and the songs of birds returning from the winter. The Cheyenne camp was alive with movement, laughter, and the rhythm of daily life. Children ran across the open spaces, their playful cries blending with the low hum of conversation and the crackle of fires. Among them, Martha Ellison moved confidently, carrying her daughter Little Bird in her arms. Her body had healed from the long winter of struggle, and her spirit, once weighed down by fear and despair, now felt light and purposeful. Martha had become an integral part of the tribe, her days filled with work, learning, and care for those around her. She assisted the women in preparing meals, mending clothing, and teaching Little Bird and other children small skills that were essential to life on the prairie. Every day brought new lessons, new responsibilities, and a growing sense of belonging. Martha marveled at the way the Cheyenne people lived in harmony with the land, showing respect for every creature, every plant, and every human life. She had learned their songs, their stories, and their customs, and each lesson deepened her appreciation for the kindness and wisdom of these people who had taken her and her daughter in when they had nowhere else to turn. Greyhawk continued to be a quiet, steady presence in her life. He did not speak often, but his actions conveyed more than words could. He ensured that Martha and Little Bird were safe, protected, and cared for. He taught Martha practical skills for living on the plains, from gathering herbs to understanding the signs of approaching weather. Sometimes he would take Little Bird in his arms, letting her explore the world under his careful watch. And Martha would watch with a mixture of relief and admiration. She had never expected to trust anyone so completely, yet Greyhawk's calm strength, patience, and gentle care had earned it naturally. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and gold, Greyhawk approached Martha while she sat outside the lodge. Little Bird nestled in her lap. The baby's eyes were bright, filled with curiosity as she reached toward the fading light. Greyhawk knelt beside Martha, holding a small carved necklace in his hands. It was simple, made of bone beads strung together with care, yet it carried immense meaning. He held it out to her, his dark eyes meeting hers with a quiet, unspoken question. Martha's heart quickened, a mixture of surprise, gratitude, and emotion rising within her. Greyhawk spoke softly, in broken English. "Now, you belong. Together." His words were simple, yet the meaning was profound. This was not a claim of ownership, nor a demand of submission. It was an invitation, a declaration of protection, respect, and partnership. Martha took the necklace in her hands, feeling the smooth, cool surface of the carved beads, and tears sprang to her eyes. She pressed it to her chest, overwhelmed by the realization that she had found not only safety but acceptance, companionship, and care that went beyond anything she had ever known. Little Bird, sensing the significance of the moment, reached for Greyhawk, giggling and stretching her tiny arms. Greyhawk smiled, a rare and gentle expression that softened the edges of his usually serious demeanor. Martha watched, her heart swelling with emotion, as the man who had rescued them and guided them through the harshest winter now stood with them in this moment of peace. She realized that they were no longer just survivors. They were a family, bound not by law or obligation but by choice, trust, and mutual care. The tribe gathered that evening around the fire, noticing the small ceremony unfolding. The elders approached, offering quiet blessings and gentle smiles. Children watched with curiosity, their small eyes wide with wonder. Martha placed Little Bird on her lap, feeling the warmth of her daughter's small body and the rhythm of her breathing. She whispered softly to the child, telling her stories of the winter they had survived, of the kindness of strangers, and of the bravery it had taken to endure. Little Bird listened, her eyes bright and attentive, as if understanding the depth of the words even without fully comprehending them. Martha reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been left wounded, abandoned by the man who was supposed to protect her, and forced to face the cruelty of the winter prairie alone. She had endured fear, hunger, and exhaustion, yet she had survived. Through Greyhawk's intervention and the care of the Cheyenne tribe, she had discovered strength within herself she had never known existed. She had learned to trust, to heal, and to embrace life even in the face of hardship. Most importantly, she had found a sense of belonging, a home where she and Little Bird could flourish. Greyhawk remained near, observing quietly but attentively. His presence was steady, a constant reminder that they were safe. He did not speak unless necessary, but every gesture, every glance conveyed understanding, respect, and care. Martha realized that his strength lay not in force or domination, but in patience, observation, and unwavering support. He had given them the greatest gift possible, not only protection but the freedom to grow, heal, and live without fear. The following weeks were filled with ordinary moments that felt extraordinary. Martha taught Little Bird to walk safely near the fire, to pick small herbs from the ground, and to listen to the songs of the elders. Greyhawk joined in when necessary, guiding the child's small hands, showing her how to balance, and laughing softly when Little Bird stumbled or fell. Martha found herself smiling more than she had in years, her heart lightened by the simple joys of motherhood, community, and the safety they now enjoyed. She realized that happiness could be found not in wealth or status, but in care, connection, and love freely given. One morning, as Martha and Greyhawk walked through the camp, they observed the community working together to prepare for the seasonal hunting journey. The children ran ahead, laughing and playing, while the women organized tools and prepared food. Martha carried Little Bird in her arms, and Greyhawk stayed close, offering support when needed. They moved together, silently acknowledging the bond that had grown between them. Martha felt a sense of peace that had seemed impossible months before, a certainty that they had truly found a home where they were valued, safe, and loved. As the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the sky in deep shades of red and purple, Martha sat outside the lodge with Little Bird and Greyhawk. The baby was nestled between them, her small hands exploring their faces and their clothing. Martha looked at Greyhawk, her eyes filled with gratitude and emotion. "We are safe," she whispered. Greyhawk nodded, his gaze steady and calm. "Safe and home," he replied, his broken English conveying more meaning than any words could fully capture. In that moment, Martha realized that they had not only survived the winter and the cruelty of abandonment, but they had also discovered something far more valuable: a family, a community, and a life filled with care, trust, and belonging. Night fell and the camp quieted. Fires burned softly, casting warm light across the lodges. Martha wrapped Little Bird in soft blankets, whispering gentle words of love and reassurance. Greyhawk remained nearby, silent but ever watchful. Martha allowed herself to relax fully for the first time in months, feeling the weight of fear and uncertainty lift from her shoulders. She knew that the challenges of the world would always exist, but for now they had found safety, protection, and a home. She had been left wounded and alone, but now through courage, care, and the kindness of Greyhawk and the Cheyenne tribe, she was whole. In the quiet of the night, Martha held Little Bird close and reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She thought of the cold cabin, the fear of abandonment, the long, lonely nights, and the desperate fight to keep her child alive. And she thought of Greyhawk, the warrior who had arrived like a quiet storm, bringing protection, care, and unwavering support. She realized that life had given her a second chance, a chance to heal, to grow, and to embrace love and belonging. And as she watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, she whispered a prayer of gratitude, knowing that they had truly found a new life, together as a family. The next morning, Martha awoke to the gentle sunlight streaming into the lodge. Little Bird stirred in her arms, and Greyhawk stood nearby, silently watching over them. Martha smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace that had been impossible to imagine only months before. She had survived unimaginable hardship, found strength within herself, and discovered a home where she and her daughter were valued, protected, and loved. Greyhawk approached and handed her a small cup of warm tea, a gesture of care and partnership. Martha accepted it with a smile, her heart full. As the days continued, Martha embraced her life fully. She taught Little Bird, worked alongside the women of the tribe, and began to find joy in the ordinary routines of their community. She learned to ride with Greyhawk, to gather food, and to live in harmony with the land. Every day was a reminder that they had not only survived but thrived. The fear, despair, and loneliness of the past were gone, replaced by trust, care, and belonging. Martha knew that they had found something far greater than mere survival. They had found a life filled with hope, love, and family. And so, on the open plains under the endless sky, Martha, Little Bird, and Greyhawk built a new life together. Spring had arrived on the plains, melting the thick blanket of snow and breathing life back into the world. The trees that had stood bare through the long winter now showed the first green buds, and the air carried the sweet scent of thawing earth. Martha Ellison moved through the Cheyenne camp with a quiet confidence, carrying her daughter Little Bird in her arms. Life had grown brighter since the day Greyhawk had discovered them in the freezing wilderness. The constant fear that had gripped her heart was slowly fading, replaced by a sense of belonging she had never imagined possible. The tribe had welcomed her and her child with care and patience, teaching her their ways and showing her a life built on trust, protection, and respect. One morning, as Martha sat outside the lodge feeding Little Bird and watching other children play, a sudden sound of hooves clattering across the prairie caught her attention. Her heart jumped and she rose quickly, shielding her daughter with her body. Greyhawk, who had been nearby, noticed her tension and moved to stand beside her, his calm presence grounding her. The sound of the horses grew closer, and soon a group of men appeared on the horizon. Their clothing and horses marked them clearly as settlers from the distant homesteads. Martha's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the familiar figure of Thomas Ellison, her husband, leading the group. Thomas's eyes scanned the camp, sharp and angry. When they landed on Martha, his face twisted with fury. "Martha," he shouted, spurring his horse forward. "You belong with me. You cannot stay here with these savages." His voice carried across the camp, harsh and demanding, as though the wind itself would obey his command. The other settlers followed him, some hesitant, some curious, but all watching closely. Martha's body tensed and a cold fear gripped her heart. She had endured abandonment, hunger, and the freezing night alone, but she had not anticipated this confrontation. Greyhawk stepped forward, placing himself between Martha and the approaching men. His eyes, dark and steady, met Thomas's gaze without fear. He did not speak loudly or shout, but his presence carried authority. Martha felt a surge of relief. Greyhawk's calm and careful demeanor made it clear that he would not allow them to harm her or her child. He spoke in broken English, using firm words that Martha could understand. "She stays protected." Thomas's face contorted further in anger. "Protected?" he barked. "By who? By your tribe? You have no right to keep her." The Cheyenne tribe gathered behind Greyhawk, a circle of quiet strength and watchful eyes. The men from the settlement hesitated as they saw the determination in the warriors' faces. Greyhawk spoke again, calmly but with unshakable certainty. "She is mother. Child safe, no harm." His words were simple, but the meaning was clear. Martha and Little Bird would not be taken. Thomas's fist clenched, his anger boiling over, but he could see that he was outnumbered, that his threats held no power here. For the first time, he faltered. Martha's heart raced as she watched the confrontation. Fear still lingered, but it was tempered by the growing realization that she was no longer powerless. Greyhawk had rescued them and the tribe had accepted them. She was not alone. She stepped forward slightly, holding Little Bird closer, and spoke in a voice that was firm but steady. "I will not go with you," she said. "I belong here now. We are safe here." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of her determination. She was no longer a frightened woman abandoned in a cabin. She was a mother who had fought for her child's life and found a home among people who valued her. Thomas's eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward, but Greyhawk did not move. Instead, he met Thomas's gaze with calm confidence. The other warriors shifted slightly, their presence silent but unmistakable. Martha saw the resolve in Greyhawk's eyes and felt a swell of gratitude. She realized that this man, who had appeared in her life as a stranger, had become her protector in every sense. He had shown her courage without arrogance, care without expectation, and strength without cruelty. She could not help but feel a deep sense of respect and trust for him. The standoff continued for several tense moments. Thomas's anger was palpable, yet the calm authority of Greyhawk and the presence of the tribe created a barrier that could not be breached. The other settlers exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain whether to continue their challenge or retreat. Finally, Thomas turned his horse sharply and shouted, "This is not over," before spurring his horse back toward the settlement. The group of men followed reluctantly, leaving the prairie and the camp behind. Martha sank to the ground, her body trembling with relief and exhaustion. She clutched Little Bird tightly, tears streaming down her face. Greyhawk approached quietly and sat beside her. He did not speak at first, allowing her to calm herself. Martha looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You saved us. Again, Greyhawk nodded, his expression gentle. He reached out and touched the edge of the blanket around Little Bird, adjusting it carefully. "Safe now," he said softly. The simplicity of his words, paired with the certainty in his voice, brought Martha a deep sense of comfort. For the first time since her birth of Little Bird, she truly believed that they were safe. In the days that followed, Martha began to settle more fully into life within the tribe. She helped the women prepare meals, mend clothing, and care for the children. Little Bird grew stronger and more curious with each passing day, her laughter ringing across the camp. Martha began to understand the customs and language of the Cheyenne people, learning their songs and stories, and participating in daily tasks that brought her a sense of purpose and belonging. She realized that she was no longer just a survivor. She was part of a community that valued life, care, and protection above all else. Greyhawk remained a steady presence in her life, watching over her and her daughter with quiet care. Sometimes he spoke in broken English, sometimes in his own language, but always with patience and respect. Martha learned to understand him, not just through words, but through gestures, actions, and the steady calm of his presence. She began to feel a bond forming, fragile yet undeniable. Greyhawk had been the first to protect her when she was at her most vulnerable. And now, as she regained her strength and confidence, she realized that this bond went beyond simple gratitude. It was trust, respect, and the beginnings of something deeper. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and orange, Martha sat by the fire with Little Bird in her lap. Greyhawk approached silently, kneeling beside her. He offered her a small piece of bread and a handful of berries, simple gifts yet filled with meaning. Martha smiled, her heart warming at his gentle care. Little Bird reached for him, giggling, and Greyhawk responded with soft laughter. Martha realized then that she had found not just safety but companionship, respect, and protection in the unlikeliest of places. Martha thought back to the long night in the cabin, when she had feared that the cold, the wind, and the cruelty of her husband would claim her life and her child's. She remembered the despair, the exhaustion, and the fear that had seemed endless, and yet she had survived. She had found hope in the form of Greyhawk and the Cheyenne tribe. She had discovered strength within herself that she had never known existed, and now, with Little Bird safe and growing, she began to imagine a future filled not with fear but with life, care, and love. The encounter with Thomas had reminded her of the dangers of the world outside the camp, but it had also strengthened her resolve. She knew that she would never again allow anyone to dictate her life or the life of her daughter. She had survived abandonment, exposure, and the harshness of the winter prairie, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. With the Cheyenne people around her and Greyhawk at her side, she felt a deep sense of security and belonging. As night fell over the prairie, the camp settled into quiet routines. Fires flickered, children were lulled to sleep with soft songs, and the adults shared stories and laughter. Martha wrapped Little Bird in warm blankets, whispering gentle words of love and reassurance. She looked to Greyhawk, who watched silently, his presence a constant reminder that they were safe. For the first time in many months, Martha felt a sense of peace that was more than temporary. She had survived the harshest trials, and she had found a home where she and her daughter could live, grow, and thrive. In the quiet of the night, Martha reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been left wounded, alone, and fearful, yet she had found courage, care, and protection in the most unexpected place. Greyhawk had been her guide, her protector, and slowly her friend. The Cheyenne tribe had embraced her, giving her a sense of family and community she had never known. And as she held Little Bird close, listening to the gentle rhythm of her daughter's breathing, Martha knew that their lives had been forever changed, not by fear or abandonment, but by the power of kindness, courage, and unwavering protection. The winter days in the Cheyenne camp passed slowly, yet for Martha Ellison each day felt like a step toward a life she had never imagined. The fear and despair of the cold frontier seemed to recede with every moment spent near the warmth of the fires and the quiet kindness of the tribe. The women of the camp welcomed her with gentle smiles and soft hands, tending to her wounds with care and patience. They wrapped her in warm furs, fed her nourishing broth, and offered quiet words that, even if she could not fully understand them, carried reassurance. Martha had never known such attention, such care that was given freely without expectation or fear of judgment. Her daughter, whom she had begun calling Little Bird, thrived in the warmth and security of the camp. Surrounded by the laughter and play of other children, the tiny baby grew strong and curious. Martha watched her with a mixture of awe and relief, amazed at the resilience of this small life she had fought so desperately to protect. The sight of her daughter's bright eyes and growing strength brought a new energy to Martha's own body, which still ached from the birth and the days of struggle. She found herself smiling more, laughing softly when Little Bird babbled or reached for her hand. It was a joy she had not expected to feel again, a spark of life in the midst of hardship. Greyhawk remained a quiet presence throughout this time, visiting regularly to check on them and to make sure they had everything they needed. He spoke little, but his actions carried meaning. He would bring additional blankets, hunt small game for food, and sit near the fire, watching over Martha and her daughter with a careful eye. Sometimes he would speak in broken English, offering words of comfort and explanation, while at other times he communicated through gestures and patient demonstration. Martha gradually learned to understand him, and though their conversation was limited, there was a growing sense of trust between them. She saw in his eyes a respect for her strength, for the courage she had shown in surviving the bitter cold and the abandonment she had endured. The days became weeks, and Martha slowly began to heal, not only physically but emotionally. The fear that had consumed her in the days after her husband's departure began to fade. The Cheyenne camp, which had once felt strange and foreign, became a place of safety and belonging. Martha learned their customs, their songs, and their stories. She watched the women teach the children, showing them how to make simple toys, gather herbs, and care for one another. She joined in when she could, helping to prepare meals, mend clothing, and tend the fires. The work was hard, but it was meaningful, and it brought her a sense of purpose she had not felt since before the birth of her daughter. Each day, she also observed the quiet bond forming between Greyhawk and Little Bird. The baby would reach out toward him, babbling happily, and he would respond with gentle laughter and soft words in his native language. Martha felt a warmth in her heart she had not anticipated. Greyhawk's care was steady and constant, but never forced. He allowed her to grow confident in her abilities as a mother, never taking control but always ready to help when needed. Martha began to feel a sense of safety she had not known in years, a feeling that perhaps for the first time, she and her daughter could live without fear. Martha also learned about the Cheyenne people in ways that amazed her. She listened to the elders as they told stories of their ancestors, of the plains, and of survival. She learned about their respect for life, their careful attention to the land, and the way they cared for one another in ways that were both practical and deeply human. These lessons were unfamiliar at first, but they resonated with her. She began to understand that strength was not measured only by the ability to survive, but by the willingness to care for others, to protect and nurture life in all its forms. As the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, Martha realized how much she had changed. She no longer felt the paralyzing fear that had gripped her on that first night. She moved through the camp with a quiet confidence, tending to her daughter, helping the women, and even offering guidance to younger girls who reminded her of herself. Each task, no matter how small, reinforced her sense of belonging. She had once believed that she was alone in the world, abandoned and unloved. Now, surrounded by people who accepted her without question, she felt a connection that warmed her heart more than any fire ever could. Greyhawk, too, became a familiar presence in her life. He would share stories of his youth, of the plains, and of his people, teaching her words and phrases in the Cheyenne language. Martha listened intently, fascinated by the differences and similarities between their worlds. Though they spoke little, there was an understanding between them that grew stronger each day. Greyhawk respected her space and her strength, never imposing his will but offering his protection and support in subtle, consistent ways. In his quiet manner, he showed her that trust could exist even between strangers, and that care could be given without expectation or condition. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky was painted with shades of pink and gold, Martha sat outside the lodge with Little Bird in her lap. She watched the child reach for the fading light, fascinated by the colors in the sky. Greyhawk approached silently, kneeling beside her without speaking. He offered her a small bundle of berries he had gathered, and Martha accepted them with a nod, smiling softly. Little Bird giggled, reaching toward Greyhawk, and he responded with gentle laughter. In that moment, Martha felt a deep sense of gratitude and awe. They had survived the harshest challenges together, the cold, the fear, the isolation. And now, in the warmth of the camp and the presence of these people, they could finally begin to heal. Martha reflected on her past as she watched the firelight dance across the lodge. She thought of her husband who had abandoned her in her most vulnerable moment, and the bitter pain that had lingered in her heart. But she also realized that she no longer felt trapped by that past. She had found courage, strength, and resilience she had never known she possessed. More importantly, she had found people who valued life, care, and protection above all else. And through it all, Greyhawk had remained steadfast, a silent guardian whose presence allowed her to begin trusting again. Night fell, and the camp settled into quiet activity. The women tucked their children into soft hides, telling stories and humming songs that had been passed down for generations. Martha followed their example, wrapping Little Bird in blankets and whispering a lullaby she had learned from the elders. The baby's eyes grew heavy and she drifted into sleep, safe in the warmth of the lodge and the care of those around her. Martha's own eyes grew heavy as well, but for the first time in weeks she felt a sense of peace. The fear that had once been constant had softened, replaced by hope, trust, and the quiet knowledge that she and her daughter were no longer alone in the world. Greyhawk remained nearby, watching over them both as they slept. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing a calm determination that had been present from the moment he had discovered them. He knew that Martha's healing was not just physical, but emotional as well. Trust, understanding, and a sense of belonging were as essential as warmth and food, and he understood that by offering them this care, he was not merely rescuing them from the cold prairie, but giving them the chance to reclaim their lives and find hope where there had once been only fear. In the quiet of the night, Martha felt the beginnings of a bond forming, not only with Greyhawk but with the tribe that had taken them in. She realized that survival was no longer just about enduring the cold or the harshness of the frontier. Survival now included love, care, and the support of others. The Cheyenne people had given her and her daughter a home, a sense of safety, and the chance to heal. And in that realization, Martha felt a deep and profound gratitude. For the first time, she could imagine a future where she and Little Bird could grow, learn, and thrive. As sleep finally claimed her, Martha held Little Bird close and allowed herself to rest, knowing that she was safe, cared for, and beginning to heal. The wind still whispered outside, but its threat no longer seemed overwhelming. The fear and isolation of the past were slowly being replaced by hope, trust, and the quiet joy of belonging. And in the steady, watchful presence of Greyhawk and the Cheyenne tribe, Martha began to understand that even in the harshest winter, life could flourish when nurtured with care, kindness, and protection. The prairie stretched endlessly under the pale winter sky, a blanket of white snow broken only by the dark shapes of bare trees and the distant hills. The wind whispered across the land, carrying the scent of pine and the faint musk of the wild animals that roamed these empty spaces. Greyhawk, a young Cheyenne warrior, rode his horse steadily across the frozen plains. His eyes, sharp and attentive, scanned the horizon. He had been hunting small game to bring back to his tribe, but his mind was alert to any unusual sign. The plains were wide, and danger often hid in quiet places. He had learned long ago that life here required attention to every detail, to every flicker of smoke, every shadow that moved too quickly. As he rode, he noticed something unusual. A thin spiral of smoke rising from a low, crumbling cabin near the edge of the hills. Smoke in the winter was common, someone burning wood to stay warm. But this smoke seemed weak, almost struggling against the wind. It drew his attention, a quiet alarm in his mind telling him to investigate. Greyhawk's instincts, honed over years of living on the prairie, told him that this was no ordinary signal. He slowed his horse, moving cautiously toward the source. He scanned the ground as he approached, noticing footprints in the fresh snow. Some were deep, heavy prints of a man, others lighter, smaller, and trembling. Greyhawk's hand instinctively moved to the bough slung across his back. As he neared the cabin, he noticed another sign. A small figure huddled near the doorway, wrapped in ragged blankets. A faint sound reached his ears, the soft, fragile cry of a baby. Greyhawk's heart stirred, a mixture of caution and concern. He had encountered many dangers in his life, but the sight of a mother and her newborn alone in the cold, exposed to the winter's cruelty, demanded action. He slowed to a careful walk, keeping his horse steady and quiet, so as not to startle whatever waited inside. Inside the cabin, Martha Ellison had been sitting beside a small fire, weak and shivering. Her daughter lay in her arms, bundled in quilts, and every time the wind pressed against the cabin walls, Martha's heart jumped. The long night had left her drained, but her vigilance had not faltered. She had grown alert to every sound, every shadow, every movement outside. When she first heard the faint crunch of snow under horse hooves, she froze. Her mind raced. Could it be her husband returning? Could it be someone else? She clutched her daughter tighter, holding her close, trying to calm the child as her own pulse quickened. A soft knock came at the door, careful and deliberate. Martha's breath caught. She whispered to the baby, "Shh, stay quiet." Another knock followed, a quiet rap, respectful but firm. Greyhawk's voice followed, low and calm, though she could not understand the words at first. "Woman, child, danger?" he said in broken English, using words he knew, hoping she would understand. Martha's eyes widened. She did not know if this man was friend or foe, but something in the tone of his voice, steady and cautious, gave her a glimmer of hope. Hesitantly, she rose, clutching the baby tightly, and opened the door a crack. Greyhawk's eyes met hers, dark and steady. He was strong, tall, and lean, with a presence that carried both authority and care. In one fluid motion, he dismounted and extended his hands in a gesture of help, not threat. Martha hesitated, fear and caution warring with the faint hope rising inside her. Finally, she nodded slightly, her arms still wrapped protectively around her child. Greyhawk carefully stepped forward and gently lifted the small bundle from her arms. The baby cried softly, sensing safety in the stranger's careful touch. Greyhawk examined the cabin quickly, noting the weak fire, the thin blankets, and the woman's pale, exhausted face. He understood at once that they could not survive here for long. The cold was biting and Martha's strength was fading. Without a word, he gestured for her to follow, helping her steady herself as he guided her to the horse. She walked slowly, leaning on him for support, her body weak from lack of food and sleep. The baby was tucked close to Greyhawk's chest, warm against the hides of his robe. Martha's heart raced, a mix of fear, gratitude, and disbelief. She had expected strangers to pass by, to leave her to her fate, but here was someone offering not judgment but protection. The journey across the prairie was slow and careful. Greyhawk adjusted his pace to Martha's unsteady steps, ensuring that the baby remained warm and safe. The wind tried to push them back, the snow clinging to their clothing, but he pressed forward, drawing upon his knowledge of the land. He knew the safest path to his winter camp, a place where his tribe would welcome them and provide care. Martha followed, shivering but trusting him more with every step. She watched his careful movements, the way he scanned the horizon, the way he seemed to anticipate every danger. Slowly, her fear gave way to a cautious hope. By the time the first shadows of evening stretched across the snowy plains, they were near the edge of a wooded area. Greyhawk pointed to the trees ahead, signaling the direction of safety. Martha could see faint light in the distance, the glow of fires from the Cheyenne camp. Relief and exhaustion mingled within her, making her legs feel heavy yet willing to move. Greyhawk helped her over fallen branches and through patches of deep snow. Every time the baby stirred, he adjusted his hold, murmuring softly in his native tongue. Though Martha could not understand the words, the tone carried warmth and reassurance. She felt tears prick her eyes, tears of relief, gratitude, and disbelief that someone cared enough to come for them. When they finally arrived at the camp, the Cheyenne people were cautious but welcoming. The elders approached slowly, eyes curious but not threatening. Greyhawk introduced Martha and her baby with simple gestures, speaking words she could begin to understand. The women of the tribe quickly took her inside, offering blankets, warm broth, and a safe place by the fire. Martha sank to the floor, feeling the exhaustion of days and nights of fear and struggle finally wash over her. She pressed her face to her baby's, feeling the warmth and rhythm of the small body against her own. At last she could breathe. At last she could hope. The elder women tended to Martha's wounds, cleaning and wrapping them with care. They fed her broth and small pieces of bread, speaking gentle words in their language, their faces calm and reassuring. Greyhawk remained nearby, sitting silently beside the fire, watching over them both. He said little, but his presence was steady, a constant reassurance that they were safe. Martha realized that she had expected danger, suspicion, or mistrust, yet here she found none. Instead, there was care, protection, and the possibility of something she had not felt in a long time: belonging. As night fell, the camp settled into quiet activity. The wind still howled outside, but inside the circle of fires, warmth and light prevailed. Martha sat by the fire, holding her daughter close, watching the flickering flames dance across the faces of the Cheyenne women and children. Greyhawk returned periodically with more blankets and food, his expression calm but watchful. Martha noticed the way he looked at the baby, a soft and careful gaze that seemed to weigh every movement and need. Slowly, she felt a connection forming, fragile but undeniable. Perhaps this stranger, this warrior of another world, was more than just a rescuer. Perhaps he was the first friend she had known in many long days of fear and loneliness. By the time sleep finally claimed her, Martha had begun to feel the edges of hope. The harshness of the prairie, the cruelty of abandonment, the bitter winter wind, and all seemed slightly less frightening. She had survived the night. She had survived the storm. And with Greyhawk's help, she and her daughter might even survive the days ahead. For the first time in her short life, Martha felt that she was not entirely alone, and that maybe, just maybe, she could find safety, care, and even trust in the unlikeliest of places. The wind howled across the lonely frontier, carrying with it the icy bite of early winter. In a small, weather-worn cabin at the edge of the prairie, Martha Ellison lay on a thin straw mattress, her body trembling from exhaustion and cold. The night had been long, longer than she had thought possible, and every muscle ached as though the world itself were punishing her. She clutched her newborn daughter to her chest, feeling the small, fragile body shiver against her own. The baby's cries were soft, almost fading into the whistling wind that seeped through the cracks of the cabin walls. Martha's hands shook as she brushed back damp hair from her face, her breath shallow, her eyes heavy. She had given life to her child, yet she felt as though death might claim her at any moment. Her husband, Thomas Ellison, had disappeared hours ago. He had stormed out earlier in the evening, his face red with anger and frustration. Martha still could hear the echo of his words, cruel and sharp, slicing through the thin walls of the cabin like arrows. "A girl?" he had shouted. "Why would God punish me with a girl when I needed a son?" His anger had been sudden, uncontrollable, and frightening. Martha's heart had raced as she tried to calm him, to explain that the child was healthy, that she had done nothing wrong, but he would not listen. In a rage, he had stomped out into the night, leaving Martha bleeding and alone, her cries muffled by the howling wind outside. The midwife who had come for the birth had fled in terror, leaving only the faint smell of herbs and the echo of her frightened footsteps behind. Martha's fingers traced the tiny fingers of her daughter. They were pink and delicate, curling instinctively around her own. She pressed a trembling kiss to the baby's forehead, whispering words she barely had the strength to say. "I will protect you," she murmured. "I will keep you safe. No one will hurt you again." The words felt small and fragile in the cold cabin, but she spoke them anyway, because silence seemed heavier than the winter night. Every shadow that moved across the cabin walls seemed like a threat, every creak of timber a warning. The fear of being alone with her newborn was nearly unbearable, but she forced herself to focus on her daughter's tiny breathing, slow and steady, and tried to take comfort in that small rhythm of life. Hours passed slowly. Martha struggled to rise and fetch more blankets, wrapping her child in torn quilts that smelled faintly of dust and old wood. Her body protested every movement, but she knew she could not stay still. The cold was relentless. Each gust of wind that slipped through the cracks in the cabin walls made her shiver uncontrollably. She felt weak, her body still recovering from the strain of birth, but she refused to let herself collapse. She whispered encouragement to herself, trying to summon every bit of strength she had. The baby stirred in her arms, and Martha felt a surge of determination. She would not let this tiny life be lost to the cold, or to the cruelty of the man who had abandoned them both. Martha thought about her neighbors on the settlement, but the nearest cabin was miles away. She knew no one would hear her cries unless she found the courage to venture outside, and the thought terrified her. The wind was fierce, the snow beginning to fall in soft flakes that quickly grew heavier. She imagined her husband riding across the prairie, leaving them behind, and her heart ached with a mixture of anger and sorrow. How could someone leave a mother and her newborn to face such danger alone? But in that pain, Martha found a flicker of resolve. She would survive. She had to. For her daughter's sake, she could not give in to despair. As night deepened, Martha tried to rest, but sleep eluded her. Every sound made her startle. Every shadow seemed to move closer. She pressed the baby tightly against her chest, feeling the small heartbeat beneath her hand. It was fragile yet persistent. The strength of life in such a tiny body inspired a sense of awe in Martha, and even in her fear, she felt a spark of hope. She whispered stories to the child, imagining a future filled with warmth and safety, a place where the wind would no longer bite, and where a little girl could grow without fear. Her words were quiet, barely more than a murmur, but she spoke them with conviction. She refused to let the darkness consume them. Martha remembered the days before the birth, the quiet moments of hope when she had dreamed of her child. She had imagined a son at first, as her husband had wished, but she had also felt a love that was unconditional, a bond that went beyond expectation. Now, in the cold and the fear, she understood the true weight of that love. It was not about gender or expectation. It was about survival, protection, and the will to keep a life safe against impossible odds. She tightened her hold on her daughter, feeling the small fists press against her chest. Each tiny movement, each little cry reminded her that they were still alive, that they had a chance to face another day. By the first light of dawn, the snow had begun to settle around the cabin, creating a blanket of white over the prairie. Martha sat by the window, her body exhausted but alert, watching the horizon for any sign of movement. The tracks of her husband's horse had disappeared, leaving only the vast empty expanse of the snow-covered plains. It was a reminder that they were truly alone, left to face the world by themselves. Martha's heart ached, but she refused to succumb to despair. She whispered to the baby again, telling her of the wide-open plains, the beauty of the winter sunrise, and the promise that they would find safety. She had no idea who, if anyone, might come to help them, but she clung to the hope that someone would notice the smoke rising from her small, lonely cabin. Hours passed slowly. Martha tended to her daughter with careful hands, keeping her warm, feeding her with what little milk she could muster, and wrapping her in layers of cloth. She moved with caution, conserving her strength, aware that the smallest misstep could lead to disaster. She thought about the stories she had heard of women surviving the harsh winter alone, and she drew courage from their endurance. She told herself that if they could survive, so could she and her daughter. The thought of giving up never crossed her mind. She was a mother now, and motherhood brought with it a fierce determination that no fear could overcome. Even as the snow continued to fall outside, Martha's resolve grew stronger. She began to plan for the day ahead, thinking about the journey they might have to take to find help. She knew she could not stay in the cabin forever. The cold would eventually claim them if she did not move, and she had to be ready. She imagined walking across the prairie, carrying her daughter close, searching for the nearest settlement, or perhaps finding a traveler who would notice them. Every plan she made, every thought of movement filled her with both fear and hope. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew they could survive if she kept faith and held fast to her determination. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Martha allowed herself a brief moment to look at her daughter's face. The baby's eyes, wide and curious, stared back at her. In that gaze, Martha found a spark of life, a reminder that hope was not lost. She kissed the child softly on the forehead, whispering promises she intended to keep. "I will protect you, little one. No matter what comes, I will keep you safe." The words were simple, yet filled with the weight of her resolve. She had been left alone, wounded and frightened, but she was not defeated. She had a purpose, and that purpose was her daughter. Together they would face the cold, the wind, and the loneliness of the prairie. Together they would survive.